You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
9/11 was about 20 years ago. We're coming up to the 20th anniversary in a day or two. And for those of us that were alive back then, it seems like it went by in the blink of an eye. For those of you who were maybe just born or little kids, you don't really have any memories of it, or you weren't born at all at that point. Obviously, you were born at all, but not at that point. It's probably something that seems like ancient history to you, but I assure you it's not. 20 years is not a very long time. And we've got an author with us today to talk about the lesser-known event of that day. Of course, we know about the Twin Towers. That was the thing that we all sat and watched on television and couldn't believe as we saw them crumble before our eyes. And then to a lesser extent, the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. But this is Flight 93. Flight 93 went down here in Pennsylvania. And since we are a Pennsylvania-based show, today we thought that we would commemorate Flight 93 and talk a little bit more about that, because there are some interesting things there. There's some interesting things in the story that we think we know and that we don't know. And then, of course, the memorialization afterwards. And to talk about it with us is the author of this book that I just showed you, Tom McMillan. Welcome, Tom.
Matt, great to be here.
It's good to have you. So tell us about Flight 93. What is it? Before we started, you had mentioned that there's things that we think we know from the first 7 to 10 days. Yeah. So what do we think we know from those days?
I want to say, getting the challenge of writing I learned during this process that there's a challenge to writing a book about contemporary history. Mm-hmm. Because people have memories of what happened. I've written 2 books on Gettysburg. No one was alive during the Civil War. You don't have, but here I heard this on CNN, I read this on the internet, so you're dealing with that. And what I realized in looking back through it is that, we as a species have short attention spans. And I think people focused on everything, consumed everything for about 7 to 10 days, and then you moved on with the rest of your life. There's a lot I learned in journalism school. Usually there are flaws in reporting early in a tragedy because even the authorities don't know what happened yet. But reporters are grasping for information, so things get out there and they become part of the urban legend. And even though they're corrected weeks or months or years later, when you watch documentaries, around this month, the 20th, you'll hear that the main weapon was for the hijackers was box cutters. That the people on the planes called it with cell phones, and those things aren't true, but they become part of the legend, and people just accept them.
So Flight 93 was not taken over by the use of box cutters?
Now, the FBI found 9 receipts for Leatherman multi-purpose tools, Leatherman wave tools. You can still buy them today. They have 10 or 11 blades. So they bought at least 9 of those. I always used to think I wouldn't want to get cut by a box cutter, but I couldn't understand how they hijacked 4 planes with box cutters. Right. They had knives, and they researched us really well. They took advantage of our freedoms. They knew, as certainly I didn't back then, that it was legal to carry a knife blade up to 4 inches on a plane. So people say, how'd they get this on the plane? They put them in their pockets and walked on the plane.
Wow.
It was legal to do that. So the FBI came up with evidence. So they had more than just box cutters. And on the phones, I think it was just, reporters those early days heard there were phone calls from the planes, and they just, I think, wrote that these were cell phones. There's one famous call from Flight 93. There were 37 calls made from Flight 93.
Okay.
2 of them were from cell phones. Very late when the plane was very low. 35 of them were from the seat back airphones. They no longer exist. They're now video screens. But if you're old enough, you remember there was one phone for every 3 seats. Yes. You pull it out, run a credit card through it, make a call from 35,000 feet.
Yeah.
It was really important for the FBI it was hard to piece this thing together because everyone involved in it died. But they had records of these calls, either who made them or at least where they, who paid for it, where it went, how long, and where they were sitting on the plane. So you can almost see the little clusters of people who were probably plotting together or planning together. So it really revealed a lot of.
That's amazing.
It gave us some insight. It's frustrating because we can't know everything. There were no phone calls made after they started their counterattack, the passengers and crew, and they fought in the air for about 6 minutes. We have the cockpit voice recorder transcript. That's about it. But by using these pieces of evidence, you can piece together and come up with a story of what likely happened, or at least as much as we'll ever know.
So, okay, give us a couple more in the 7 to 10 days. Then.
Well, the one that I always say, I volunteer out at the memorial, and everybody wants to hear the Todd Beamer story. There's one name and one phrase. It's just Todd Beamer, let's roll. Todd Beamer, let's roll, and that's a great story. And Todd Beamer was a hero. He was one of the guys, but he was only one of many heroes. I don't even think he was the leader. And I'm trying to, so I tried to figure out as a former reporter, how did this story become about one guy? And we need.
Well, you got to have that one guy.
We need those symbolic stories, and the phrase was great. But so what I determined was there were at least 3 guys from the plane who called and said something like, "We're going to try to take it back." But Tom Burnett and Jeremy Glick called their wives. That's a key point. Beamer did try to place a call to his home and clicked off in 1 second. The technology wasn't very good.
Right.
Then he hit 0 and gets an AT&T operator in Chicago, Lisa Jefferson. That's the story that goes down in American lore, because the next day when reporters are trying to get some quotes on this story, the wives of Tom Burnett and Jeremy Glick aren't doing interviews. They're mourning the deaths of their husbands, and their families are wrecked. Lisa Jefferson, who took the call, well, traumatized, didn't know Todd Beamer.
Right.
She told this story, and on the darkest day in American history in my life, then here comes this silver lining, and this young guy, and he said, "Let's roll," and they fought back. And he had 2 kids with a third on the way, and President Bush invited his wife to the White House. So it's very understandable. But there were so many people who did so many things on that flight that I think it's a little bit of a disservice to theirs if we focus just on one person. Again, Beamer was a hero, but we need to look beneath the Beamer story as well.
Not to keep the focus on Beamer and not get onto the other people yet, but the let's roll quote. Did they get that from the operator?
Yes. She said that's what he said.
So there's no recording of it?
No. The only recordings we have are 3 people got voicemail messages. We didn't even, message machines back then.
Right.
So we have those. But the other calls were, the loved ones didn't record them. And Lisa Jefferson didn't record that, so we just have their testimony on what they said. But she said right away, I heard him say, "Okay, guys, let's roll." And Beamer's wife said that was a phrase that he'd used when the kids were, "Okay, guys, let's roll," when he was trying to get his guys going.
Okay, so she corroborated that
yes,
could have been him.
Yes. And so, again, a lot of this is that we just have to piece it together. But, she said it right. It wasn't something that she said 7 years later. Lisa Jefferson telling a story. It was a story she told the next day. And it's such a dramatic phrase, and it became kind of the catchphrase.
Oh, I remember it was everywhere, yeah.
But what it does is it kind of it takes all the oxygen out of the rest of the story. There were so many people who did so many things. Again, I'm not even sure Beamer was the leader. But if that gets, as we've talked about some Gettysburg things, if that gets people interested, great. He was a hero. He played a key role. But I think my goal was if you read this book and you didn't know anything about Flight 93, you would know Beamer was a hero, but just one of a number of heroes. It's not focused on him.
So who were some of the other heroes?
The 2 men I mentioned, Tom Burnett and Jeremy Glick. I think Burnett probably was the leader. He'd former high school quarterback, appointed to the Air Force Academy, COO of a company, about to be named CEO. Leadership every step of his life. He was 6'2", 205. Jeremy Glick was 6'1", 215. He was a black belt in judo, former national judo champion. At the University of Rochester. There's a guy named Mark Bingham who also made some calls. 6'4", 225, 2-time rugby champion at Cal Berkeley. These guys were, and Beamer was a small college sports star at Wheaton College in Illinois, baseball and basketball. You had some really strong athletic guys on it. They fit a bill of people who, if you were to do this, you would want them on your side.
Yeah, sure.
But Burnett made calls, Glick made calls, Beamer made calls, Bingham did. I would say 13 people made calls. I mean, we talked about the 40 heroes, the 33 passengers and 7 crew members. So if 13 made calls, 27 didn't. It's like at Pickett's Charge or D-Day. Those stories died on the battlefield. We'll never know those stories. We'll never be able to. In the Civil War, we still have somebody. You can go up in your attic today and find a letter from your 3rd great grandfather.
Right.
It answers a question. That will never happen here because everyone who was on the planes died. So we can just do the best we can to piece it together. But there was a flight attendant named Sandy Bradshaw who was in the back boiling water to throw on the hijackers. One of the One of the flight attendants, C.C. Lyles, had been a police officer before she became a flight attendant. Was famous at one point down in Florida for tackling a suspect and surprised the suspect by tackling. Yeah, so you had all sorts of Class A personality people, and there was an elderly couple that were grief counselors. People on board had to be terrified. I mean, everybody didn't run down the aisle.
Right.
So I mean, pulling together, I think it was so much a group effort, and I think people did what they could do. You can be a leader or a participant, even if you're not the one banging on the cockpit door and trying to take the plane back.
How many hijackers were there on Flight 93?
There were 4 on Flight 93. There were supposed to be 5. The plan was for 20 hijackers, 5 on each flight. Al-Qaeda couldn't get the 20th into the country. So this crew had one less man. One man was nominated, made it all the way to Orlando in early August, and was turned back by a very perceptive Border Patrol agent, immigration agent, who he didn't speak English, didn't know where he was going, didn't have any money, didn't have a return ticket. So Al-Qaeda, who had planned so well, didn't plan well with this guy. He certainly would have been the fifth guy on Flight 93. Yeah.
So 4 guys. How do they take over the flight?
Yeah, we know what the plot was supposed to be because 2 of the plotters are still in Guantanamo, and they tell a consistent story that it was going to be. Now,
just to be clear, you're saying 2 of the plotters, but not hijackers,
right?
They're all dead.
The Al-Qaeda plot, 2 of the masterminds,
the behind-the-scenes guys,
yeah, exactly. They're still down in Guantanamo, and they've told they've told consistent stories. It was supposed to be 5-man teams, 1 hijacker pilot. They had been in the country for more than a year, getting licenses to fly small planes at schools in Florida and Arizona, and then they practiced on simulators of 757s and 767s because they didn't have to know how to take off or land the big planes. Just
fly it and crash it.
And then each one was supposed to have 4 muscle hijackers, which 2 would attack the cockpit and take out the pilot and first officer. That happened on all the flights, obviously. And the other 2 were supposed to shove the rest of the passengers and crew to the back of the plane. And we know from where the phone calls were made on Flight 93, those folks, that they were pushed to the very back of the plane, the back 8 rows, kind of create that sterile space in there.
Okay.
Now once the plotters know what was supposed to happen, they don't know what did happen. On board, I don't know how the Flight 93 hijack team dealt with having 1 less man. It may have had a factor, though. There are 2 delays in this flight that are important. The flight was 40 minutes late taking off. That's a key point in this story that Al-Qaeda had...
Took off from where?
It took off from Newark to San Francisco.
So it's right across the river from, you could see the skyline.
Absolutely.
You could see the Twin Towers across the river.
When they made their turn, they would have seen the Twin Towers. Al-Qaeda picked 4 flights that would take off within 25 minutes of one another. If they all had taken off on time, this would have happened so fast that was their plan, that nobody would have been able to do anything. This flight, Newark airport traffic, was on the ground for 40 minutes, and then for reasons we don't know, but perhaps because they were down a man, they took longer than they were supposed to hijack the plane. The plot was to do it within 15 minutes. That may have seemed a little unrealistic, only happened on 1 plane, but the other 3 all did it within 30. These guys took 46. So it's already 9:28, and they're already almost over Cleveland by the time they hijack the plane, at which point coverage had been on television for a half hour.
Okay. So when these people are calling from the plane, the people that they're talking to, if they get a hold of someone, is watching the television and they know what's going on. And so now the people on Flight 93 are being filled in as to how that they're actually a part of this overall plan.
Key part of the story. I always try to say that the people on the first 3 flights were no less brave. They just didn't know what was going on because of the delay and because of things were on TV. These poor folks are calling their loved ones they're terrified, I'm sure. I'm on a plane that's hijacked. The unintended consequence was that information came back. Planes are hitting buildings.
Right.
And then another plane just hit the Pentagon. And it really, if you look, and I try to time out the calls and what the loved ones had said, it's really after the plane hits the Pentagon, which was at 9:37, that galvanized me. You kind of know that they knew they have to try to do something then. They're not going back to the airport. This isn't a normal hostage situation.
Did the plotters that we have at Guantanamo, did they have they told us what the target was for Flight 93's team?
They both phrased it Capitol Hill.
Capitol Hill.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're almost certain it was the U.S. Capitol.
Okay.
So they both said Capitol Hill. We do know from the 9/11 Commission and some other investigators found out that Bin Laden did want the White House, but the hijackers argued. The folks who were here argued against that, and I think their argument made sense. They argued that the White House isn't that distinctive a building from up high,
right?
Especially for someone who's not a native,
right?
of our country.
The Capitol is.
Look at the other building. Yeah, the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, the Capitol is.
Very easy targets from the sky.
Yes.
Yeah, they make sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they kind of made their own choice. Again, do we know 100%? No. We know that the plane the autopilot was sent to Washington, D.C. We know it was going to D.C. And so the overwhelming evidence is that it was the Capitol.
So that's another thing. So they leave Newark. Its final destination was what? California?
San Francisco. Yes.
Okay.
They were all East Coast to West Coast flights.
They got and those would be full of fuel, right?
They choose Tuesday morning because
fewer people.
Fewer people. There were only 33 regular passengers on Flight 93.
Right. And then. How far did Flight 93 get before it was hijacked and turned?
It's about over the Pennsylvania-Ohio line, right there where it's hijacked, and then he turns it around over Cleveland. So Cleveland Air Traffic Control is the one that's trying to contact him, and then they start angling down southeast, kind of over Pittsburgh that way, and that angle toward DC.
Yeah. And so they set the autopilot for DC. And so basically, they can just wait until they get within DC.
Autopilot is probably, I probably used the wrong phrase.
The
directional coordinates.
Okay.
The directional coordinates for D is what I meant.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so the whole Let's Roll plan, do we know or have any idea as to how it was developed? I mean, did anybody that was calling say, there's some guys are planning on taking over the plane or anything like that?
One guy said 3 guys. They said we're going to fight back, and one guy said 3 guys as big as me are getting together. We're going to do something.
Okay.
Tom Burnett said we're going to do something. That's really all we know because, as I can only guess, they were developing it as it was going on. Again, you just think the time frame. If that plane hits the Pentagon at 9:37, and that galvanized them, their counterattack starts at 9:57. They have max 20 minutes to figure this out.
Yeah.
And you can imagine the chaos. First of all, just the general chaos on board. And there was no way 40 people all agreed. It's human nature.
Of course.
There had to be debates and arguments.
Absolutely.
But to me, that's the most incredible. It still takes my breath away that they were able to process that information and come up with a plan in that brief of time against people who had been plotting for years to do this. They're getting on a plane to fly to San Francisco. They no idea they were walking into history. It's remarkable what they did.
So they do. Now, you were saying beforehand that you think that they were not trying to commit suicide to save thousands of more people, but they were trying to wrest control of the plane back. Is that what do you base that theory on?
There's one piece of testimony. It's from them on the cockpit voice recorder, and only the families and one trial jury have heard the actual recording. But the FBI, for a trial in about 2006, came up with a very detailed transcript. And just after 10 o'clock, and the flight crashed at 10:03, there's a native English-speaking voice. One of the passengers says, "In the cockpit, if we don't, we'll die." And just think of what that means.
Right.
In the cockpit, if we don't, we'll die.
So
we have this.
Get in the cockpit because if we don't, we'll die.
To me, their own testimony was they had an alternative to dying.
Right.
There was a man on the plane who was a veteran small plane pilot, licensed to fly small planes. His name was Donald Green. There's another man on board, Sonny Garcia, who'd done 8 years of air traffic control for the California Air National Guard. They had didn't they know how to fly a 757? No. But they had some knowledge of aviation.
But we've all seen airplane. Like somebody could get in the cockpit seat and then call the control tower and be talked down.
For people who believe this, there are a number of people who've studied it who do, based knowing on the personalities on board, and that without that statement, you're just making it up.
Right.
But that statement, I can't imagine what else that meant. in the cockpit. If we don't, we'll die. I think they were trying to get Donald Green in there. And yeah, with instruction every step of the way from air traffic control, they might have had a chance. It was a long shot. It might not have worked anyway, but so I think, it comes out that the plane crashed and they saved all these people on the ground, but I think they were trying to save the entire plane, save themselves.
So then, more realistically, then, if that is the case, which makes sense to me, then maybe the plane went down in that field because of the struggle and not on purpose. They're struggling in there and, somebody ditches the plane.
I think that was it. If you look at, it's the only flight where they found, the FBI knew this was the site where they would find the most evidence because the plane didn't hit a building.
Right.
Imagine how much evidence was destroyed by the towers and the wall of the Pentagon crumbling. Well, here it just hit the ground.
Yeah.
They found both black boxes. And the flight data recorder, they were able to do an animation of the flight path. And in the very last minute, the steering wheel or the yoke turns very hard to the right, and the plane turns upside down.
Jeez.
It actually crashed upside down.
Really?
So now, why did that happen? We'll never know for sure. It could have very well been they're in there, they're struggling for control. Remember, the passengers didn't have weapons,
right?
And in the struggle, it turns to the or the hijackers were told that if they couldn't reach their target, to ditch the plane.
Yeah.
Now, Mohammed Atta, who flew the first plane in the World Trade Center, who was the leader of the whole group, said that if he couldn't reach the Twin Towers, he was going to crash his plane into the streets of New York City. Again, it creates some chaos. So,
can you imagine that? I mean, geez, that would have been
it's just. But if so, we'll never know. But even if the hijacker pilot did do that, it was because of the pressure. It's because he knew he was about to be taken over. So we can't ever solve that mystery. But because they did what they did, the wheel turned, the plane turned upside down. It turns out, they wouldn't have known it, but unfortunately the counterattack started too late. The plane was too low.
I want to continue this conversation for our Patreon patrons. So for those of you who want to know more about Flight 93, get Tom's book. It's called Flight 93. Where can they get it? Amazon?
Amazon's the best place.
Okay, Amazon's the best place to get it. Go ahead and get it. It's really interesting. I'm sitting here talking about this. We're going to take a commercial break right now. If you want to hear the rest of this, become a patron over at patreon.com/addressing Gettysburg, and we will be right back. And that's it. Now we'll continue, and then this will, okay. Okay, so now, where did I want to go? Okay, so they crash. The crash site. Earlier when you were talking about how the first 7 days or 7 to 10 days, early reports are always erroneous and later corrected. They're never corrected with as big a splash as the initial report.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, and even when they are, people aren't paying attention anymore. That's
exactly.
The thing
They're over it.
The other two wives wrote books, the ladies who got calls, but they write books years later,
right.
and nobody's reading. A small number of people are reading them, so we don't know the story.
Yeah.
The story doesn't make an impact.
But did you think that when we met at the Farnsworth house, we also discovered that we're both JFK nuts? and
I was alive. I was in the second grade.
You were there then. So do you? You look at these conspiracy theorists, right? And they seem to get, I don't know if they get more press, but people seem to believe them more than they believe the press nowadays. Yeah. And I remember after 9/11, there was, of course, all these conspiracy theories coming out, and I thought it was reprehensible. Meanwhile, I was into all the JFK conspiracy theories because that was ancient history to me, right? But it was because of the 9/11 conspiracy theories that I started to question the JFK conspiracy theories because I lived through 9/11. And I know certain things that conspiracy theorists were presenting to be bull because I witnessed it happen, whatever, on television or whatever it was. Like, I just know from living through it that that's not what it was. And then the biggest thing would be, never in the history of fire or whatever stupid thing they come up with has fire melted steel. But no one ever claimed the steel was melted and that's why the buildings fell. And they never claimed that that was it. Never in the history of jet fuel has fire melted. And so it actually caused me to go back and look at, JFK with a different light. And now I completely believe that Oswald did it, just as I believe these 19 hijackers did that too. I guess my question is, well, not really a question. It's just more of an observation that these conspiracy theorists look at those early reports, knowing that they've been corrected or retracted or whatever, but knowing that you don't. And then they point to it and say, well, why, do they say this on the day of, they said it looks like an implosion, what did they call it? A stage demolition or what the hell do they call that? What's that term I'm looking for?
It's an implosion.
No, I know it's an implosion, but what do they call it when it's done on purpose?
An implosion.
No. That's not the term they use. It's a demolition. They're saying that it looks like a demolition. And so that to them is evidence that it was a planned demolition. And but that's not what they're saying, So as a historian, how frustrating is it? Like, have you run into people who
from day one, and because we talked about being JFK buffs, and I was there too. Conspiracy theories are seductive. They're intoxicating.
Yeah.
They're exciting, and especially now, magnified by the social media world, the internet. You can find anything. Every time. Sometimes when someone will come up to me, and I'll just say, but you have to have evidence.
Yes.
Well, I read it. Just because somebody wrote it on the internet doesn't mean
it's not evidence.
There's evidence. There's just so much of that. It is so frustrating. And when you're doing the history, you look at it. Are any of these claims credible? No. None of them are certainly. I mean, I followed the entire 9/11 story, but especially Flight 93.
So it wasn't shot down by Dick Cheney.
Well, that was. Just, and I go through the timeline there because the president did give, and Cheney did give the okay to shoot down a plane if it was approaching Washington,
right,
and wasn't responsive. This was after Flight 93 had crashed.
I said, but they don't tell you that.
You have to look at the timing.
Yeah.
You have to look at the timing. And the other thing that I noted that was really, we can talk about it as much as you want, but when you see yourself mentioned on conspiracy sites. Someone like me who's read all the JFK stuff, all of a sudden I am now on the 9/11.
Yes.
And
you're part of the conspiracy.
I'm part of the conspiracy.
Explain that to the audience.
I did. I was reading about myself, and they were talking about my motivation. And one of my bosses used to work in the Clinton White House. That's the political connection. McMillan was assigned by the White House to write the official. You watch. This is 2014. He's going to get a big promotion and make a lot of money.
And how are you doing since that promotion?
I'm lightfully retired and having a great life.
Early retirement, clearly, right? They let you retire early for that.
I even said in the book, it was an interview I did, and I said, these guys, the folks at the Flight 93 Memorial, took me out to the actual crash site. And what I meant was, the way they set it up, the general public can get to about 75 yards of the crash site. Mm-hmm. Only the families can get to the impact site. It's their graveyard. Again, contemporary history, it's so close. So only they're allowed to go. Very appropriate.
Are you saying today or at the time?
Today still. That's
no one can actually go to the crash site.
You're about 75 yards from where the plane impacted the ground.
Got it.
It's out of respect for this. Is
sure.
It's
because they're still there.
They're still there. It's the first generation. Yeah. It's their gravesite. And I think probably in 50 years it'll be like Gettysburg. You'll go out there, but it's just so it's like, where's this secret crash site McMillan went to? So it's almost like I was trying to explain. I was so excited, in my research that they took me out there, and the plane crashed right before a grove of hemlock trees, and the Somerset County coroner gave me a tour out there. We're in the trees, and he's saying this. He said, "This is where I found the hijacker's passport. This is where I found." They found so much stuff in the trees because the first third of the plane sheared off and shattered and flew into those trees. So much evidence was found there. They had to get
sheared off in the air still.
As the plane hit the ground at a 40-degree angle.
Oh,
the front third cleared off, sheared off, shattered, went into the trees. They found so much evidence in those trees, up in the trees. They had to get tree surgeons from Penn State to come down and climb the trees to get stuff up from up there. They found all sorts of objects from the plane.
Wow.
And the bottom 2/3, one FBI agent said, accordioned into the ground. They found items 35 feet deep. They dug 40 feet. The black boxes are in the back of the plane. They found them 15 and 25 feet deep into the ground.
So it wasn't a 90-degree nosedive. It was at an angle.
40 degrees angle, upside down, at 563 miles an hour.
Jesus Christ.
On top of it, on the land of a reclaimed strip mine. This, for 30 years, was a strip mine. It had just been reclaimed in 1996. So the dirt was put back in. So it wasn't as consolidated as
it was softer dirt.
It was soft. Yeah, you walked on it, you didn't know that.
Sure.
But it was, that's right where it hit. And by finding all that evidence in the trees, it was just, I know for those folks, it was haunting to walk around in those trees. And
sure.
They said
hemlocks are scary trees anyway.
It was you could hear sizzling. They could hear burning, and stuff was falling out of the trees as the first investigators, the local firemen, the local people got there first.
Yeah.
Bewildered by what happened.
What did the locals say? Like, what did they have to say about it?
The one thing that struck me.
How did they describe it? I guess. And by the way, the term I was looking for was controlled demolition.
Controlled demolition.
Yeah, not planned.
Sorry, couldn't help you with that.
Yeah.
Especially when you read, talk to them, or you read the memorial did a lot of volunteer oral histories. They talked to people, the local residents. It's not just that they heard it or saw it; it's that they felt it. Imagine a 757 hitting the ground at 563 miles an hour. What that would have done to the ground.
What is it? What does a 757 weigh?
I don't. I probably have it in the book. I don't know off the top of my head. It's very heavy.
Yeah. I mean, dozens of tons, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Hundreds, maybe.
Yes. And just the speed, 500, because the hijackers were trying to go fast. They were trying to create. First of all, they're trying to get to D.C. as fast as they could,
right.
And they wanted a big explosion. These planes were going. I think the slowest one was going in the high 400s that hit one of the towers. So it's. You have that kind of devastation. I know when the locals got there, because they got there before the FBI did. The local firemen, they thought they were going to try to save people. They couldn't comprehend what was happening. The county coroner told me that they were watching what happened at the towers, and then a plane crashed. And he said, we didn't really put two and two together until the FBI guys started showing up around noon. That this was, we were just doing a plane crash in Somerset County. We're doing our job, because no one could imagine, why would a plane crash in Somerset County?
Right.
It certainly wouldn't.
Why would they target it?
Wouldn't have been a target.
Yeah.
There were a number of people living nearby who saw it in its final minutes. They saw it, very low. Some saw it upside down.
That's got to be a sight.
Yeah, and I just. And there's a guy who works for a auto junkyard there. He's there at all the memorial ceremonies. When he saw the plane go over, you could tell it's part of his life now. He always signs a card and leaves a card there, and he feels a part of the story because he saw it. Imagine what you would have thought, not knowing what was going on. I think the other thing, Matt, we have to always try to tell people. It's hard to recapture how bewildered we were on that day, because we even those of us who lived with it, because we know so much now, we tend to think we knew more on September 11th than we did. I knew it was. No, you didn't.
No, we didn't.
And we didn't know if more attacks were coming.
I remember
that day, the next day, what was.
You want to talk about news reports? I remember very distinctly a report saying that there were 99 planes unaccounted for, and so of course. I was on the phone with my friend, and we're all thinking that's 99, that they're hijacked, Yeah. And so we're like, oh my God, this is just getting bigger. Like, we had no idea what to make of it. And of course, it was just that they were unaccounted for at that moment, but they all got down.
One of the total unsung heroes of that day were the air traffic controllers, because
can you imagine? Yes.
At the time the plane hit the Pentagon, which is about 20 minutes before Flight 93 crashed, there were more than 4,000 planes in the air in American airspace. The guy who was running the FAA, the operational director of the FAA, Ben Sliney, that was his first day on the job. And he ordered all planes to land, first time in American history. But
Can you imagine that your first day and you have to ground every plane?
And they were talking the billions. If that had been a wrong decision, the billions of dollars he would have cost. So what a gutsy! It's an easy decision now, but what a gutsy decision at that moment. But the other thing, they all were to land at the nearest airport, which meant you had 4,000 planes, most of them going the wrong way. Because it was landed at the nearest airport.
Right.
So where's my nearest airport? There, if I'm flying to Chicago, maybe I land at Cincinnati. Maybe I land at Louis. I don't know where.
Yeah.
But imagine.
I see what you mean by going the wrong way. They're going to the wrong destination.
They're going to the wrong destination.
Yeah,
they're going to a different destination.
Yeah.
And there's no plan. And the air traffic controllers were all how those men and women did that day.
That is amazing.
It's the unsung story of the heroism that there wasn't one crash. How that happened.
Yeah.
And also that leads to, the ridiculous shoot down theories. It's like there was one plane in the sky. Which one are you going to shoot down? Which one of the 4,000 planes in the sky, most of which are going to the wrong destination?
Right.
Are you picking out that this is the one?
You mustn't forget that the government was behind this, of course. So they know exactly which plane to shoot down. Yeah, I know.
It's absurd.
So the memorial, well, some more questions then about because again, 9/11 or not 9/11, the World Trade Center. There's 3 million angles of the event, of every moment of the event. We've all seen it 100,000 times. It's and I've been there. I was there December of 2001. We went to see the hole, and so that helped put more of a picture in my head of the whole thing. But Flight 93, Shanksville, that field out there, very few good photographs have come out. There's some the most common one I've seen is an aerial shot of the crater.
Yeah.
And it looks very small. And you mentioned that the 2/3 of the plane accordioned into itself in the ground, but it's very hard to see any evidence of any plane.
Yeah, exactly.
Why? I mean, obviously the speed, but was there bigger pieces of the plane, but weren't photographed by
the utter violence of the crash shattered everything. The biggest piece of the fuselage was about the size of the hood of a car.
Okay. So when a conspiracy theorist says, how come there's nothing bigger than, a shoe out there? The reason is science.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And they found many airplane parts and seat belts and parts of the plane.
Right.
And the plane's ID number. They found all those things. And you hear that at the Pentagon too. And they found all that. But yeah, and the thing that where the Flight 93 story gets overshadowed is because there isn't that dramatic video. We have that video of the second plane hitting the tower and the tower's crumbling and that wall at the Pentagon crashing in. And even that security video of the initial impact, we don't have any of that because it wasn't supposed to crash out there. No, that wasn't nobody knew what was happening. So it's rather unremarkable video. It's just it's an open field in small town Pennsylvania with smoke coming from the ground. And the other thing is when you think of it. New York, as far as the visitation afterwards, because I did the same thing these days. But New York and D.C. have tourism infrastructure.
Sure.
They're building.
Well, they also have media infrastructure. How easy and quickly and easily did they get cameras on the World Trade Center?
Right.
Like that.
And
from all over the place.
Shanksville, PA, population 245, does not have a tourism director.
Right.
And so, part of this, the last half of my book is on the investigation and the development of the memorial. And it was really done by local people. It was really started by local volunteers who said, we can't have these people coming to our county, coming to our town, and no one greets them. And that's how it started.
So we go into that because that's what I wanted to get into next, the memorial.
Okay.
So go ahead.
It was the hardest memorial to fund, and people kind of roll it and say, wow, he was such a patriotic story. But there were many people from New York who died in the World Trade Center. There are many people who lived in D.C. or Virginia who died at the Pentagon. Nobody from anywhere near Somerset County died on this crash. So you had no local base.
Okay.
And there's no local corporate infrastructure in Somerset County. Pittsburgh is the closest, it's 100 miles away. So you didn't have this memorial was largely by people's donations.
Really?
That's how they raised the money. There were some Pittsburgh corporations. There's some corporations chipped in, but not like the other two cities. This is people chipping in $25, $50, $10.
Okay.
And they had to, there were 8 landowners that they got the land all the way out to Route 30 because they wanted to have a kind of a silent zone. So that it's very quiet when you go there. They didn't want a lot of commercialism.
Good.
Yeah.
Learn from Armistead.
They did it very, very well. And they only opened part of it on the 10th anniversary. They wanted to get something opened. It's complete now, but they didn't have the visitor center. But they wanted to get something for the families on the 10th anniversary. So the wall of names, which marks the flight path, and you get down there within 75 yards of the crash site, and a big sandstone boulder marks the crash site. So they got that going, and then the visitor center, which was a very key part of the educational part, opened in 2014, which really gave us the educational thing, not just for kids, but for adults as well who don't know the story. But it is very much a landscape memorial. There was a competition. There were more than 1,000 entries, and the guy who won it, he said, I want this to look like an open field in Somerset County. It's not going to look appropriate for New York or D.C. There are not a bunch of monuments there.
Right.
Some people come out and say, where are the monuments? They want, no, this is very much a landscape memorial, and I think you feel that when you go there.
I have to go there.
And a few people are disappointed, but most are overwhelmed. And the one thing I noticed when I volunteer there is people are different when they leave. They come in and they're telling stories. They're coming off the Pennsylvania Turnpike and they're eating potato chips. And they leave and they're a little, it makes you think. It does affect you that way. It has. There's some people in the summers. We get a lot of people who are coming back from D.C., maybe going back to Michigan or Minnesota or wherever, maybe back from the beach and they've stopped at the Pentagon Memorial and they say the feeling's the same. I think it is. I get the same kind of feeling. The difference being the Pentagon Memorial or the Vietnam Memorial is on the National Mall.
Right. This is a national park, though, right? Shanksville?
But it's where the plane crashed. The point is, the Vietnam Memorial is not in Vietnam.
Right.
That's why you get it. It's a tribute to those brave men who lost and women who lost their lives. But this is right where it happened. And for those of us like you and I who love history, part of what we love is being in Gettysburg. Something happened here. Yes. I love to walk the field, stand there. This is where it happened, and you definitely feel that at the Flight 93 National Memorial. So it's understated, but I think it's perfectly understated. And
Shanksville is right off of right on Route 30.
The memorial's right on Route 30.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So how far a drive is that from here?
It's about 100 miles. You would take the turnpike. You would take the turnpike and get off at the Somerset exit. That's the best way to do it.
Okay.
That's the quick. But from the turnpike, it's 20 miles. So the thing is, the power of the story is amazing because they're still averaging the COVID year notwithstanding, about 400,000 people a year. It's not easy to get to. You don't stumble on the memorial. You go there as a destination. It's not like, oh, look, here's another museum. Let's go to this.
Right.
No, you're going there for the purpose of going there. The pickups we get are the people coming back from vacation. They see the billboard on the turnpike. I'm this close. Let's go. But it's even 20 miles off there. So, that's where it crashed. I mean, it crashed in the middle of small town America, but it's kind of an effort to get there.
Eric, you're from St. Mary's, which is how far is that from Shanksville?
Oh God.
I mean, is it out? I mean, where is St. Mary's? I've never actually looked at a map. Is it
northwestern PA?
Northwestern PA.
Somerset, southwestern PA. It's probably, I don't know, from my parents' house, probably a 5-hour drive.
And how old were you on 9/11?
16.
16. So you were in high school.
Yeah.
And you were obviously living in Pennsylvania. So being a Pennsylvania native, when I don't know, just tell me your whole feeling on the day. Like, what do you remember of the day? And what kind of kicked you in the nuts more? Was it New York and seeing all that, or the fact that one went down not too terribly far from where you lived?
It was the focus was always on New York, because that's what the media was focused on. They weren't focused on Shanksville at all. I honest to God, I'm one of the few people that will cop to not really remembering a whole lot about 9/11. I know exactly what Tom's talking about when, you meet people that say, yeah, no, I remember everything. No, you don't. You really don't. You remember it because you've watched a couple of documentaries after the fact, and you've pieced these things together and strung together that story that your mind is trying to rationalize the things that happened on that day. But you don't remember that.
No. Well, and the one thing that you were saying, Matt, you talked about JFK. Like I was a little kid when that happened.
Sure.
But I always tied it into with my parents with Pearl Harbor. Like I always said, my parents, like I understand that was a terrifying day, an important day in the country, but I could never feel the terror that my parents would have felt.
Right.
And so the kids, they can't feel the terror that we felt that day. And they did some research. There have been 75 million Americans born since September 11th, 2001. That's a fifth. God. 1/5 of the country wasn't even alive. And then if you add on the people who are in college now, who were barely alive,
they're still brain dead.
We've got a huge part of our. It's why for those of us who it's such an impactful day for us. It's why we've got to keep telling the story because. And one of the reasons why I was surprised there just hadn't been much written on Flight 97. Why did I write it? Because nobody else. I was interested. Nobody else was going to do it.
So that's amazing to me because there's a place to go and visit.
Yeah.
You would think that people would write the books so that they could be sold around that place to go and visit.
My book came out in 2014. There was only one book. There's only been one other book written about Flight 93. It was written in the first year after the crash by a guy from the New York Times who covered it. So it's very well done, very emotionally charged. Talks to a lot of the families, but they didn't know much back then. He did a really good job with the information they had, but since then nobody had. And when I talked to people, they said, well, they were happy I was writing the book because at some point, the first generation family members aren't going to be here anymore.
Yeah.
You can't call those people who got, talking, part of the research, talking to two of the ladies who got calls from the planes and having them recount to me getting that call. And it was so surreal hearing them talk about that. I just can't imagine.
Did you record that or did you just take notes?
I just took notes. It was stunning. I had to kind of sit back a while, and just think of this person was talking to someone on the plane, what perspective that would be.
In the last minutes of their life.
Yeah.
And you all know it.
Yeah, and they all, because people always ask me, they love the fact that the families are involved in the memorial. Visitors love that.
Sure.
But they ask, do they come back? I said, it's about a third. A third of them are pretty much living their lives to honor their loved ones. They're the backbones of the memorial. Third of them come back on occasion. Some of that is just distance because some of them live in California.
Sure.
And a third of them have totally moved on. I mean, we all handle grief differently. Yeah. And they remarry, move on. I honor it, but I'm not going to go back there. And there's a man named Jack Grancolis who I just did an interview with. His wife was on the plane, Lauren. He was back on the 5th anniversary in 2006, has not been back since. He's going to be back for the first time since then. On this anniversary, and he said it just took me that I had to go back there early, but it took me that long. And now he's fine with it. He talks about it. He talks about the emotions. Sure. He talks about what it means to him. But it took him that long to be able to deal with it. So we're all like that. And I guess some people, I don't know. I heard people say it's too close. See, to me, I'm not as a historian. I wanted to find out what happened on September 12th.
Right.
That's just the way I'm wired.
Right.
But a lot of people, when you have a tragedy,
they can't talk about it.
Yeah, they can't.
I had a friend back in New Jersey whose brother was murdered, and when I was trying to become a filmmaker, the advice that a filmmaker friend of mine gave me was start in your own backyard. So I said, well, let me talk to her and see if she'll want to do one about her brother. And she was all into it because when he was murdered, she was the one there at the courthouse every day just staring daggers at the guys who did it. When they have their, when they had their appeals, she was always there. When they're up for probation or whatever, she's always there. So she was all willing to do it, sat down in front of the camera with me and talked about it and everything. And I said, okay, well, we got to get your family involved too and everything. So we went over to the house and talked to her parents and all that stuff. And they thought about it, but they just came back and they said, we just can't. And that was 20 years after he was murdered. People handle it differently.
Yeah,
She's all, yes, let's talk about it because these sons of bitches just wanted to go and have a thrill kill. Yeah. And my brother was just an unwitting victim of the whole thing. So, yeah, I know. People grieve differently. The other thing coming up on 20 years of 9/11, you read about the veterans of this battle coming back 20 years afterwards. And I was 23, I think, when 9/11 occurred. And so, a lot of soldiers were around that age during the Battle of Gettysburg. And so when they would come back here, they would be my age. They would be 43. And it just helps me put things into perspective as to just how long is 20 years, what can happen in 20 years. And I mean, for me, the last 20 years were a blur. And then I looked back and not much has happened for me until about 3 years ago. It was a big waste, but that's my own personal decisions. But the point I'm trying to make is that it's not a very long time. And so for people who are having a hard time still grieving with it, and I mean, that's a traumatizing thing. Yeah. I can only watch a 9/11 documentary on 9/11 each year. And I force myself to do that so that I'd never really do forget that emotion. And because I haven't desensitized to myself to it by watching documentaries all year long, it's as raw as the day it happened for me still, because it all comes up again. Yeah. The anger, the sadness, the embarrassment. There's a lot. It's like all of these emotions that we felt on that one day as a nation. It's just like every worst emotion or every bad emotion that you could possibly feel just all came in on that one day because of these little sons of bitches.
And for these people too, I've heard a couple of them say it to me. In addition to just the personal tragedy, they had to share it publicly.
Yeah.
They were all being interviewed or attempted to be interviewed. And we understand that. We wanted to hear their stories. And some of them were okay with it, but some of them weren't.
No.
And some of them aren't. And some of them still aren't. And that's part of it. They recoil from that part of the publicity. And it just, but to me, thank God for the people who did have the personalities to want to do this, to want to be there all the time, because they're the ones who drove the memorial. It's really, in many ways, it's a family member driven memorial. They had a lot of help, but they were kind of the motivation for getting it going as quickly. And you're right, it is different. The other two sites, so many people. When you go to the New York Memorial, it's almost like the people on the planes are forgotten.
Yeah,
there's so many people in the towers, and the firemen and the police. There's so many other people involved there, and the people who worked at the Pentagon. Here, it's Flight 93. It's just the people on the plane. That's it.
Yeah,
that's it. So that it's a simpler story from that standpoint. And that's the memorial at New York is tremendous, but to me it's overwhelming. I need to take a break going through it.
I haven't been to the memorial yet, so
it's heavy. Yeah. It's really well done, but there's so many areas that they have to cover.
Yeah.
Whereas at Flight 93, it's pretty much the story of these 40 people.
We had a memorial in the town back that I lived in back in New Jersey, and it was made from the steel beams from the towers. And that was enough, I think, for me to see that, just because it just made it real, and it wasn't something I watched on TV. It was a real thing, and I mean, it's no longer there. I grew up with those twin towers. Like certain points in my town, I can see them, and it's iconic to me, and it's completely gone. It's a silly thing. It's a very superficial thing, but it is kind of a trauma to have the physical landscape of where you grew up change like that, right overnight.
Remember an interview that would have been on one of the national cable news networks just a few days after. It was a guy standing in Manhattan. He was crying because he said, the towers aren't there.
I remember that.
The tower, my whole life, the towers have been there. The towers aren't there. And it was, and even I think I was trying to work in Pittsburgh the next day, the U.S. Steel Building, which is now UPMC, but it was the U.S. Steel Building, 66. But that's the tallest building in Pittsburgh. And I was driving, just looking, I was fixated driving, and imagine a plane hitting that building. Mm-hmm. The one thing, Matt, I think of the video from New York, because we've seen it so much, the one thing it's missing is the sound.
Well, I'm glad you said
imagine that. Imagine it's all a little antiseptic because we don't hear the crash. What would that sound have been like?
The most vivid memory of that day for me was later on in the evening I remember it was dark outside. I don't know how late it was, but they had finally, videos were coming into the news stations all day long. And this one video came in from, it couldn't have been a block away. It was very close, on a rooftop. They're looking up at the North Tower burning. And then before you see anything, you hear this god-awful screeching, groaning engine mechanical sound and a Doppler effect and all this stuff. And out of the frame, out of the frame comes the second plane, and it hits the tower, and the sound of it screeching in, and then the explosion, and then the woman, who I don't think she was doing the camera, I think she was near the camera, but her panic and terror and just screaming, usually that annoys me, but it got me because I just could not get that sound out of my head for weeks. And you're right, the sound is what does it, because it's everything. It's the sound of the plane itself. It's the sound of the crash. It's the sound of all the stuff cascading down from the holes. It's this people screaming and the siren. It's absolute chaos. And sound, to me, you can't unhear sound.
And I know we can't. No, and I know we can't go forever. But when I went to the New York Memorial, there was a photo in there that I'd never seen before. It was of a street scene in New York after the first plane had hit the tower, and there was a guy walking down the street. And again, people didn't know that a plane hit necessarily; they just knew there was an explosion.
Right.
And he had this very quizzical look. There was an airplane seat sitting in the middle of the street, just a single airplane seat, and he's looking at like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah, I've seen that.
And it struck me, and that's the bewilderment of that day. We didn't even, those people, even if you go to YouTube and watch the network coverage, at the beginning, they weren't quite, these veteran news reporters, they aren't quite sure what to say. It's really revealing. For a young person who doesn't know, Google that. Google ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN coverage that morning and watch the first 15 or 20 minutes and how bizarre, surreal that is.
There's plenty on YouTube. I think either TLC or Discovery several years back did a special like 9/11 by the minute or something like that, as it happened or something. Yeah. And those are my favorite. There's a good one for JFK too. Have you seen that? Three Shots That Changed America?
No.
Oh, look it up. It's just the TV coverage. There's no narration, no talking heads, just TV coverage. It's great.
Amazing. I'll get to it on September 12th.
Yeah, there you go. November 22nd. Wait till November 22nd. Yeah. No, so it's look that up, youngsters, because it's good, and just sit and watch it, and then whatever. It doesn't matter if it's NBC, CBS, ABC, whatever. Pick one of the channels, find their coverage, and it's just it'll be. And they might have commercials in there, but watch the commercials. Yeah. Watch the commercials, because that shows you the mood of the country prior to 9/11. Yeah. And that's the last time that we ever had that mood.
It's amazing to see those. Yeah, to see the like ABC. What was the interview on Good Morning America before the commercial break, right before 8:46? Right.
What was the bullshit that they cared about?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you knew that everything was going to change. I don't think we knew it was going to change this much. Yeah, it's just. So anyway, a lot of that was just having lived through it. Obviously, it's different. Again, having written books on Gettysburg, which I didn't live through, you can only pull that together. But this one, part of the emotion of doing a book like this, and it is emotional to do it.
I would imagine
it's emotional still to read it. And not only do I know what happened, but I know how the book goes, and it still makes me emotional because
you connected with these people. You've connected with relatives of the victims.
I can hear them talk. It's different as the author. I can hear them saying these things.
Did you go to their houses?
No, mostly I met them because they were scattered around the country. Okay. Mostly I met them in Somerset or at the memorial when they were there, or on the phone.
You just sat and talked with them.
Yeah. It was because I was doing this kind of on my own as an amateur. I didn't have anybody,
not backed by the Clintons,
with a travel budget or the U.S. government as the conspiracy said.
Well, of course you would say that.
Told me to write the story.
Yeah. Well, Tom, you're going to be on again to talk about Armistead and Hancock and Gettysburg Rebels, which I know a lot of our audience has read. If you haven't read either of those books, start boning up on them, because we're going to talk about them with Tom in a couple of months or so. And that's about it. Tom, thank you very much.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
I enjoyed talking to you. It's a lot of fun. And I can't wait to get into this book, because this is an interesting thing. I really don't know much about the circumstances surrounding Flight 93.
I look forward to your reports.
Read it. And thank you for signing them. And that's it. Thank you, patrons. Have a good day. Take care of yourselves. All righty. Cool.